All right. This is Pastor Joey. Yeah. Yeah.
And this is Jared, his brother.
Hey, do you remember Joe Dude?
Yeah, hell yeah.
Do they do that anymore? Like, didn't they say, like, so we watched finals NBA together. That was kind of bonding time for me and you on summers. Like, we would stay
Right.
up late, Dad would go to bed, and we'd write down what happened and all that stuff. It seems like in those Pistons series against the Lakers and then against the Trailblazers, didn't they say that after every score?
Pretty much. Yeah.
Bill Lambier.
Yeah, I definitely remember that.
Oh man, I'm telling you, the 90s is like Matt and Toby, they make fun of me that I'm a late 90s, early 2000 guy with movies, music, and absolutely everything. I disagree because I think NBA's heyday was early to mid 90s.
Yeah, I'll agree
But
there.
maybe 90s is my favorite decade. I don't know. Definitely some of the best movies came out in the 90s for sure. I mean, Forrest Gump, Shawshank. Oh man.
I would argue though, like I would say for me, NBA would be like 85 to 95.
Oh snap! So the Boston Celtic Laker rivalry.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think didn't Jordan start in the NBA like 88 or something or 87? Like he was definitely mid to late 80s.
Come on, Jared.
What?
Jared.
What?
Jared. 80. I'm gonna guess 84 was his rookie season.
That early?
Yeah,
84?
because he remember he took the route that most of the greats had to take with not winning a championship for a while. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, 84 though. I can't believe that. Okay, no, I mean, I guess that makes sense.
Like the Pistons had the best of, so playing career 84 to 93. He didn't even play 10. Oh, that's right. Duh. He came back 95, 98.
Right.
And then 2001, 2003. So, all right. Well, let me ask you something. We have talked to a lot of different characters on this podcast, lots of people, lots of different perspectives. I think I want to go so far as to say it seems like in the church there used to be only room for a certain type of believing Christian. So in other words, there are certain things that used to be essentials that are no longer essentials, and people can still be considered to be Christians. So it's like the circle is widening, and it seems like it's in a good way. So the circle widening for people to say, yeah, I'm a Christian, and I also believe that people can get to God through Hindu spirits, or, that would not be a healthy widening circle. But it seems like the circle is widening from the perspective of some people are just like, yeah, I'm not sold on inerrancy, or I'm not sold that such and such a sin is really a sin, even though it seems like the Bible is clear on it.
I would say though that's more of a product of your own personal circle of friends and social circle and church circle widening, not because I think that if you still went to the same church you went to back in 1988, it would still be that very close-minded Christianity.
Yeah, but what I'm saying though is, okay, I think I see what you're saying. It seems though then that more people in the church are accepting of people that they wouldn't be accepting of back in the day. So I guess what I'm saying is maybe the cultures that we were a part of are dwindling, or they don't have the biggest voice anymore. So an example that I would give is Peter Enns. He's an author that I think most people would say he's a Christian, where 15 years ago, almost all Christians would say he can't be a Christian. There's no way.
Well, I'm not really familiar with Peter Enns, so what would make people say that he's not what would be some of the fodder people would use?
Not a literal translation of Genesis, not taking the Bible and as something that's inerrant. Just basically, man, we've got to figure out how to really think this through and not read the Bible so strictly, in other words. But he's still a believer. It just seems like there's room for those guys where there used to not be a choice. And I'll tell you, that may make some people uncomfortable, but no one can argue against the fact that it definitely, in this day and age, it's Christianity is something that is more accessible to people that don't believe. And we all know that Jesus is the core. Jesus is what people need to meet. So even if that accessibility, if somebody wants to say, well, that's not healthy because I don't believe that way, if it ends in Jesus, isn't it a good thing?
Yeah, I think that's true. But I think we've had guests on this podcast who would call themselves Christians. It would still argue that Jesus isn't. It's not all about Jesus. There's other things that can get you there. So yeah. I mean, I'm with you. I mean, ultimately, it's about Jesus, and I agree with that 100%. But I think though that the circle of Christianity is widened to even accept people who go further out than that into the circle of Christianity, and I don't think that's healthy, personally.
What? Give me an example of that.
Well, I just think that there's definitely, I think Christians nowadays who would say there are other roads that can lead to salvation other than Jesus.
Gotcha.
And to me, that's heresy.
Yeah, but how is that Christianity?
Well, these same people can call themselves Christians.
Okay, so basically they just get to use the term Christian any way they want.
Right.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think it's healthy. I think dialogue is always healthy. I think that as long as it's done in a humble, respectful, and really God-fearing spirit, then I think dialogue is always the best thing to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm with you on that. But I do think, though, I really do believe that we can, as Christians, still call bullshit on things that we think is heresy.
Yeah.
So, and I think that, as long as we don't do it in a really mean-spirited, haughtier-than-thou attitude, but I think there are core doctrines that you can't mess with.
Right.
And I think we're right to call it as that.
Right. Yeah, what I'm frustrated with is when people that are willing to take that stand, whether I agree with what they're specifically talking about or not, they shouldn't be looked down on for saying, no, I'm sticking with this. Like, this is what I'm sticking with. Like, to me, that's when it gets crazy. Like for example, okay, so there's starting to be a little more dialogue and a little more openness towards the gay community, and in Christian circles, people even pointing to the Bible saying, no, I'm not so convinced that it's that black and white. For Christians that would say, I can't help it, it seems black and white to me, they shouldn't be seen as hateful people. I mean, are you kidding me?
Totally agree with
Now, for sure, there are a lot, and I mean a lot of Christians that are very hateful towards the gay community.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, for sure, but it's not because of their belief, it's because of their actions. It's because of how they carry out their belief. But that's insane for someone to say, hey, because of your belief, you're hateful.
I agree. And that's where this dialogue, this open dialogue, which I agree with you, I think is so important these days. That's why this dialogue has to be conducted with humility and love and God fear,
Yeah.
But the moment you start injecting your own biases into the conversation, that's when things take a wrong turn.
Well, I would want to push back on you and say we all inject our biases. I don't think we have the capacity not to. Like, how do we? Like, you read the Bible.
No, I know what you're saying. Yeah, I guess that was a poor word choice. I think whenever you start pushing things that aren't clearly in line with what the Bible says.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not even a good way to say it. I guess when we become full of ourselves to where we become blinded to A, the Holy Spirit, B, someone else who's wiser than us or that has wisdom that's different than ours, we start like just kind of blindly excluding those factors, I guess that's what I'm talking about.
Gotcha.
You're not being open-minded. You're not being humble. You're kind of closed up.
Gotcha. All right. Well, you guys can see the direction that this episode is going in, and you would be wrong. We're going to be talking about something totally different than all of this. We're going to be talking about money. Is it okay to be a rich Christian? What does tithing look like? What's the difference between hoarding and saving? Should Christians even save? Should we invest? All these questions we're going to be sitting down with Jack Hoy, the father, and he's got some good insight on this topic. Before we do that, though, I want to thank all of our listeners for a lot of the interaction and people writing us, expressing appreciation for these conversations. It is actually, I'll just go right out there and say, it is very neat to read that people are benefiting from these conversations. Some of you say that you've never even heard these sorts of things discussed in this way. Some of you really relate to our guests and are thankful that you don't feel as alone. So we want to thank you. I also want to make a big ask for everyone to go to pastorwithnoanswers.com, join our Facebook group. You can connect to it from there. Follow us on Twitter. You can do that from pastorwithnoanswers.com. And I'm going to ask everybody that's listening to this episode to go click contribute and, and contribute $1. So if you're listening to this episode, just all it is your time. I mean, most of you can afford $1, and I'm going to ask you to contribute $1. And I'm not going to be mad at you if you don't. I won't even know if you don't, but I'm asking you to. And one of the reasons why is my brother and I want to step up our game a little bit with technology and work with some different softwares and microphones and all that sort of stuff. So for those of you that listen and you listen regularly, it's just a chance for you to be like, hey, I'm gonna invest a little bit in this because I enjoy it, et cetera, et cetera.
And actually, I will be mad, and I can find out who's not contributing the $1.
Oh, snap. How can you do that, Jared?
Well, I've got ways.
Oh, okay. Well, let me speak for myself. I'm not going to be angry because pastors don't get angry. Pastors are always even keel, and we always do the right thing.
Whatever.
Folks, Jack Hoy. All right, so we are here with Jack Hoy, a familiar voice. It's Jared, I don't know if you saw this or not, but in one of our iTunes descriptions, I had Jack Hoy, the father, and someone said, hey, what's up with calling Jack Hoy the father? He said, are you guys really a cult or something? And so nice. Someone immediately chimed in on Facebook and said, hey, it's a father and son, dummy. Like, they have them both on there. So, but he was seriously like, guys, this is getting a little weird. I need an explanation right now.
The father.
So this is a conversation that I have I've talked to Jack a little bit about and have gained some insight, but I'm looking forward to some more. So I'll be kind of transparent here with the possibility of losing my reward in heaven. I hope God has mercy on me. I don't lose all my rewards, but I'm going to give you a snapshot of my giving. So Priscilla and I, we tithe, we give a little bit extra. For a while, it was this Jared, you know this. Mom and Dad ingrained this habit in us that for years, when I was a school teacher and single, I didn't even miss the money. Like, it was just like, this money is not mine, 10% I never get, and so I didn't even think about it, never considered it mine. As I got older, though, especially with some financial hard times with Priscilla, I was looking at our giving, and I was like, dang, man, this would really be helpful to have. Like, wow, I recognize the sacrifice. So I don't believe one can settle how much we ought to give. I'm afraid the one thing that I read by C.S. Lewis, and I'll just read it outright. He says, I do not believe one can settle how much we ought to give. I'm afraid the only safe rule is to give more than we can spare. In other words, if our expenditure on comforts, luxuries, amusements, etc. is up to the standard common among those with the same income as our own, we are probably giving away too little. If our charities do not at all pinch or hamper us, I should say they are too small. There ought to be things we should like to do and cannot do because our charitable expenditure excludes them. Again, I'm patting myself on the back here. I felt that. Like, there was a season of time with Priscilla and I was like, man, okay, I read this C.S. Lewis quote. Now I feel all warm and fuzzy inside. I'm doing the right thing. I'm giving money. Now I feel like I'm at a place where we have excess, especially with Priscilla selling houses, making a little bit of money off Bad Christian podcast. Now, probably to most people, we still don't have much. I mean, we still live in a 3-room townhouse, 14 square feet, but 1,400.
Nice.
Yeah, 14. So, but I still, you know, how my mind is wired up, and I think I'm always growing in this area, but I still struggle with legalism, condemnation. It's a constant battle. And so now that we have a little bit of excess, I think, oh man, are we too comfortable? Like, should we be giving all of that extra away? I mean, and to do that, we would have, like, we couldn't go to New York City. I mean, it was we did the trip somewhat inexpensive, but it was still a trip that we had to pay $3,000 for. So we wouldn't be able to do that. I mean, we'd have to give up stuff like we don't have cable, but I don't know, get rid of Netflix. We'd have to cut back on the kids' extracurricular activities, like pull back from gymnastics trips and all this stuff. So these are luxuries. I mean, so should we be giving more? I mean, Jared, you know me, I buy music on iTunes. I mean, talk about something that people in third world countries are just, well, I don't know. I think a lot of people are starting to have cell phones all over. But, you know, so basically, is it wrong? And is it wrong to enjoy stuff that we buy? Is it wrong to have luxuries? And there's so many places to go with this conversation. I'm about to be quiet here. So I'm going to just start here, Jack. Can a Christian be super rich and in God's will?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I guess, so pre-Christian era, but some might point to Solomon and say, you know, here's somebody who at least a large part of his life was walking in God's will. But I guess I would approach that from 2 points of view.
Yeah.
You know, one of them is, often super rich people are obsessive about piling up wealth. I mean, that's how you get to be super rich, is you're fanatical about it. Is it possible to be, in God's will and be fanatical about making more money?
Yeah.
I would question that. I think that I wouldn't judge somebody and say absolutely not, but I'm not sure. I would say for me, the answer would be no. Is it possible to be super rich and in God's will? Well, at the same time, there are people who, so let's just take an example. Let's say that you inherited your money and you became a believer as an adult. What do you do with it? It's funny. I was asked this question. Small group many years ago. I remember somebody. The question was something like, if you were given X million dollars, what would you do with it?
Yeah.
And so me, I'm a little strange. My thing was, I'd start a bank in a depressed area.
Yeah.
The capital would support deposits of this much. You could lend this much into the community. That would be a way to have an impact. And there are people like that. There are people who think like that. Is that wrong? I would say not. One of the ways, so the Great Commission says, go ye into all the world and preach. Actually, the way that the grammar reads, it's, as you're going into all the world, preach the gospel to every creature.
Right.
And I've always kind of taken that to mean that God wants people in every walk of life. And, it depends on where you're called to live.
Yeah.
Are there people who are called to live among the super rich? It seems that there are.
Yeah. Yeah. So you make a distinction between what your motivations are, not the condition of your bank account, but what your motivation is.
Yeah,
Sounds
absolutely.
Like. Do you think people take like Matthew 8:20 and 19:21 out of context? So you've got the guy that says, "Lord, what must I do to be righteous?" He's Jesus. Basically, I think he says, "Love me, love the Father," and then the guy presses him even more, and he's like, "Okay, if you want to be perfect, go sell everything, give to the poor, you'll have treasure in heaven." The dude, walked away sad. People are like, "See, that's what we should be doing. We should be," and then on it, people will point to, the first couple chapters in Acts and say, "Hey, that's what they were doing too. They were putting all their money together. They weren't hanging on to any of it." And then you have Matthew 6:26, look at the birds of the air. They don't sow, reap, store away. I've heard people use that as far as saying, don't save money. That's not trusting God. That's not doing the right thing. That's being too possessive of your money. Like, how do you take all that?
My response on the last one, so other people are supposed to pay to have your children go to college?
Right.
Well, how is that? In other words, my feeling on that stuff is there are people who are called to live in all those ways.
Yeah.
I had some, good friends who, fairly early in their married life felt like, God wanted them to give away everything they had. So they sold every possession they had, turned it into money, gave all the money away, and started over.
Yeah.
Now, that's not prescriptive, but that's what they sensed God wanting them to do. And, I related also, this passage with the rich young ruler, as he's usually called. Jesus was putting his finger on that guy's problem.
Right.
And that's the way I think it's generally interpreted, and I think that's an accurate interpretation. That's not a universal calling.
Right. I agree. So, Jared, I haven't even talked to you about this stuff in depth. Like, how do you think through all this stuff before we move on? I'm just curious,
Well, you were saying earlier on about excess money.
Yeah.
So, do you do any saving at all for college or weddings or anything? Okay, so you're meaning above and beyond the saving, you have this excess.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, again, I am a pretty simplistic dude. So, and I don't think Priscilla in any way has needs too much or something. But we definitely have different levels of comfort level. Like right now, I feel like, oh wow. Like, especially with her selling houses and stuff, okay, we're making some extra money. We don't feel pinched, We don't have I think you get the picture, Jared. I'm not rich or anything.
No, I understand.
But yeah, so we have extra money to where, there was a season of life where we didn't buy plastic garbage bags. We just used the recycled grocery plastic bags, and I never bought any beer to keep in the house because I was just like, we just can't afford that. So we've been through those types of seasons, and now, we're not in that season. We have some extra money. We're saving. We're able to put money aside pretty much every month, and take our kids on a trip and do little things here and there. Now, part of that is we are responsible with our money. We have been since we've been married. Yeah. I'm sure we've definitely made some mistakes, and some of them big mistakes, but for the most part, we've had longevity of making decent decisions and putting money aside. So I can't.
Did I hear you wrong? Did you feel guilty about your trip to New York or not?
No.
I know you struggle with condemnation and stuff.
No, I didn't. What I'm saying though is just a general picture. Like, am I called as a Christian to give that stuff up? Like, should I not do fun things?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So two things. First of all, I think there's a fair amount of scripture that says, hey, God created lots of good things, and it's good to enjoy them. And more specifically, in Proverbs 21, it says, "In the house of the wise are stores of choice food and oil, but a foolish man devours all he has." Is it bad to save? Is it bad to save choice things? Good thing? No. Another verse in Proverbs 14, I think it talks about how a wise man treasures his possessions.
Yeah.
That's an interesting way to put it.
Where is that, you said?
I think it's in Proverbs 14. And so, is any of that stuff wrong? No, not in a blanket way. But, one of the things that was interesting to me when I was wrestling with this years ago was, the Bible seems to speak approvingly about saving.
Right.
But condemns hoarding.
Right.
So what's the difference?
Yeah.
And, I remember having a friend talking this through, and, what we kind of concluded over time was, the difference is saving for a specific purpose that you think is God-honoring is good.
Yeah.
Piling up money for no purpose is not good.
Right.
So it's interesting when my wife and I were kind of maybe at a position like you are, Joey. We had young children. We were we'd kind of gotten our heads above water, and I had a conversation one night, and my wife said, like, really, what do we need that we don't have?
Right.
And then why should we spend any more on ourselves than we're spending now? So, that led to, so we talked about that. So what we decided to do was to freeze our standard of living.
Yeah.
We, so I kind of looked at, okay, what do we need to be saving for the things we're saving for? We'll save that. What are we currently spending? We feel okay with what we're spending. We won't spend any more than that.
Right.
And we'll just give away the rest.
So this may sound like a silly question, but was part of your plan luxuries like vacations and doing fun things for the kids?
Yeah, like we didn't, kind of like you probably, we didn't have a lavish lifestyle, but we took vacations. We did fun things with the kids. Yeah.
Now, when you froze your standard of living, had you the mortgage paid off and that sort of thing? Okay.
No. And but so what was interesting, actually, my income soared over the next few years.
Wow.
Yeah. So we more than doubled our giving in a 3-year period.
Yeah.
It was great. It was it was really a good. Now, what happened? I was transferred to a different city, a city where, boy, the quality of your school district really varied a lot. So we ended up needing to spend more for a home, and maybe like that was okay.
Yeah.
It wasn't like you were never allowed to spend more in your. It was a good experience for us, because I think what it did for us was it broke the link between income and spending.
Yeah.
I think the way most people tend to approach it is, the idea of how much should I give? It's kind of like what's the minimum amount that's okay? Because I want to stay on the right side of the line, but I want to be as close to it as possible so that I can spend as much as I can.
Right.
And I think the question really, rather than how much should I give, is another question you could ask is, how much should I keep?
Yeah.
And different people will answer that in different ways, and they'll answer it differently in different seasons.
Right. Interesting, Jack. So
go
ahead.
My question to Jack. Jack, you've been in the church for a while, right? I mean, 30, 40 years?
No, actually, I've been in the church for just a half a dozen years. I was a business guy.
Oh. Uh-huh. No, I mean, but you've been a Christian for a long time.
Yes, grew up in a Christian home, right.
Do you think, like, trends amongst Christians in saving has kind of changed over the years, or it's been relatively even keel for the past 3 or 4 decades? In terms of, like, with the typical Christian, their buying habits, their spending habits, or can you even generalize like that?
Well, so, Jared, if you look at the numbers, people save dramatically less than they did when I was a kid.
Okay.
The savings rate is about half of what it was, and the debt-to-income ratio is a multiple.
What do you think some of the causes for that would be?
Well, again, we have a very materialistic culture. We have a culture that we're very good at convincing ourselves that we need things, and we have this self-fulfillment ethos. Mm-hmm. That the most important thing in life is that you get what you think will make you happy.
So you say you would think that it's less economic and more cultural then?
Yes,
perhaps.
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Now, I would say that there are other things that go with that. So for example, when I was growing up, there was a recession every 3 or 4 years. One of the things that they've gotten better at doing is managing the economy so that recessions are more spaced out. Now, I would argue that that's not actually a good thing, because what happens when you space them out is it's kind of like trash piling up in the forest. When you finally have that fire, it's going to be horrific, which is what we experienced in 2007, 2008. But the point is that, there was less of a safety net then. There were more ups and downs in the economy. So people saved more because they felt more vulnerable.
So I guess with, when you had a young family, what was the tension between, like, do you think that how do you feel when someone says, hey, I just want to give my kid the life that I never had, sort of thing? And, like, what's the tension between, hey, like for Priscilla and I, we both value being able to, like, if we can, we recognize that it is not a need. It's not putting food on the table, but if we have the money, we want them to be able to be involved in things they want to be involved in. And at the same time, we pretty much, we're starting to say, eventually you need to find that one thing. Like, you can't be in, like, 3 or 4 different things. But should that be important, or?
Well, it's funny, Joey. I mean, so I'll talk about risking your rewards in heaven. I'll share something when, kind of like you say, your kids have interests. You try things.
Right.
You give them a shot and see what sticks. Right. See what they love, because that's part of what you're trying to do is help them find something that they love and that they can develop, and hopefully something maybe that can be a lifelong thing. So. Like the day that my wife came home and said, "Hey, I put Park on a horse," our daughter, and she loved it. And like, yeah, a daughter with a horse. And it was. So now I'll just be honest. We were spending on that. On her riding. She was very good. We were spending as much as some poor families have in a year.
Yeah.
And that I feel guilty about that. Absolutely, sometimes.
Yeah.
But, so should there be no horses? This was a lifelong thing. She ended up riding in college. That's what she does today. She works at a barn. It's funny. Horses luxuries, boy, talk, in one sense, an extreme luxury.
Right.
Was that wrong? I don't think so. But I would just say that's one of the things that is kind of unknowable. I sometimes wonder if God brought me that in my life, really partly to humble me with the idea of, like, if you think you can be dogmatic about this stuff, you have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. So we mentioned early Acts Church, and it does say specifically that they brought all of their resources together so that no one was with need, or no one had need. It seemed to be a different lifestyle than what modern day church. You don't see that sort of unity, and we as the church, or at least it seems like we have the early church on a pedestal. Like, man, those guys, and obviously that wasn't the reality. I mean, look at the letters that Paul had to write to the Corinthians. But what can we learn from what was shared in Acts? Well, is there any lesson for us there?
Well, sure. I mean, I do. So a couple things. One, it talks about how people had stuff in common, and then it talks about, and Barnabas sold a field one day and brought the proceeds.
Yeah.
I mean, not like, and that happened 50 times a day. That was unusual enough to be remembered. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind is, I think you had people being generous with the day-to-day stuff. Joey, you got nothing to eat? Come on, come eat with us.
Yeah.
And I don't say that to denigrate it either.
Right.
But the idea that it was an experiment in communal living, that may be overstating things.
Yeah.
But like I would also like one of the experiences my wife and I had. We had that seems silly. It was a luxury. I had we got a chunk of money at one point. And we decided to put it aside for an anniversary. For whatever goofy reason, we had always had a goal that this particular anniversary we would really take a special trip.
Yeah.
So we took some of this money and put it aside for that. And a year or two later, there was this family in our church that had a need, and we ended up giving all of it to them.
Yeah.
And it was a substantial chunk for us.
Right.
So as the anniversary came closer, we never had an opportunity really to put aside money again.
Right.
And I felt bad. I mean, it was a decision we made together. It was, but I felt bad. I felt like I would deprive my wife of something.
Yeah.
And what's actually kind of funny is out of the blue then, I got this invitation to speak at a conference in Australia. Never happened before, never happened since. Yeah. It was kind of a real lesson to me that, God cares about the important stuff. But strangely, he also cares about giving us this luxury that we didn't need just to show that he loved us.
Yeah. That brings up an interesting point. Do you what if you have a guy that, he's just like, dude, I heard something and I'm just radically changed. I want to, give almost everything we have away. Let's move into a cheaper house. And the wife is like, I actually want things. Like, I want to be able to make our house look nice. I want our kids to have their own rooms and stuff. And let's even say that maybe the wife does get too extravagant. Like, what kind of responsibility do you think spouses have with mediating between I don't even know if that's the right word for it, but basically navigating between their personal convictions and the person they married and where they're at with everything?
I mean, I would just say, household, you got to do it as a couple. I mean, the idea that I'm right, you're not as spiritual as I am, so I'm going to drag you along with me. I just don't think that works. And see, the other thing too is, we can't forget that preferences enter into this. Most couples, they have one skinflint and one extravagant whatever. I mean, it's obviously an exaggeration, but I mean, my point is, most couples, you have people at different places on that continuum, and you've got to honor that in each other. Part of the I'm going to give away everything, and let me guess which one of those two you are.
Right.
No, I'm not saying that in a blanket way, but so often it does align with, hey, this feels good to me anyway.
Right.
And I would say that's an area where I've made mistakes, particularly early on. Just kind of but I'm right and you're not, so we should do it my way.
Here's an interesting one. I just thought of this. What about the dude that becomes a Christian? His wife is not. They still have a decent relationship, but she says absolutely not. We're not giving any of our money. And it's not a church thing. It's we're not giving it to any nonprofit. And he's just like, yeah, but I really feel like we need to, tithe or part with some of our money. And she's like, absolutely not. You think the husband should be like, oh, okay.
Well, so how do you handle that with wisdom? I can think of several different ways, but it would depend on the individuals involved, right? I mean, I think if it was me, one of the things I think about is say, well, can we talk about what you think is good in terms of the community? Are there things that are okay to give to that would benefit other people? Could we? And if we agree on some of those things, could you start there? I mean, part of the thing is trying to, with any time where you've got two people at different places and you're trying to figure out a place to meet, you're talking about small steps.
Yeah.
And so trying to be wise about that and again, trying to be considerate. I don't think it ever really helps trying to compel your partner. How's that going to help her or help him?
Yeah.
Come, see who Jesus really is.
Yeah.
You guys are both in ministry, so what do you think the church's role should be in kind of undermining or correcting this culturally ingrained materialism?
I mean, I definitely think it needs to be talked about more. And I mean, our church
from the pulpit.
Yeah, I do.
Okay,
I mean, and our church, for example, and obviously some people will hear this in all sorts of different ways because I would say most people I talk to really like the guy, but then there's some people who are just like, man, don't like him. But we're basically encouraging our whole church to go through Financial Peace University with Dave Ramsey. And so, obviously he wants to have a culture of generosity. So our church is definitely taking somewhat of an initiative in helping people have a better relationship with money. So, yeah, I mean, if you think about the number of times Jesus talks about money, I think it's more than any other subject. So obviously the church should take some sort of a similar approach. And, I think the tough position that the church is in right now, too, is I personally think the number is growing. We've talked a little bit about this before with Jack too. I think the number is increasing of people that distrust the model of church that currently exists. Like it definitely was in its heyday in the 90s. Started, I think, with Willow Creek. I'm probably may
right.
not be totally accurate, but I just think that is possibly has its shelf life, and we could be in the next decade or so seeing the vast majority of people saying, yeah, that's just not what we should do anymore.
Well, I would agree. My argument, Joey, would be that it's more of a pendulum thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one way I got a picture of that is that I remember talking to my dad a few years ago, and his critique of the mega church movement was exactly the same as my son's.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people tend to be like, "Hey, this is shallow, and we're not really getting after the heart of God." And then after 20 years of that, it's like, "Hey, we're so inward, we can't even talk to anybody. Nobody understands our strange language, and we got to be relevant to the culture again."
Right.
Yeah. So I think the church navigates between those two extremes.
Yeah.
And maybe there's less giving nowadays because maybe in these mega churches, people feel there's a greater disconnect between the act of giving and them seeing the fruits of the giving. Like if you could directly help a family by giving them $100 to feed them for a week, you experience that firsthand. And maybe people in a mega church don't get that sense when they give their money on a weekly basis. Not to excuse it. I'm just saying that could be one reason why there's not as much giving.
Yeah.
No, Jared, that's a really good insight. And one of the things that people have discovered is like, if you say, 100,000 people died of starvation in sub-Saharan Africa last month, people kind of yawn. If you show them a picture of a starving child, their heart goes out to them. So part of the thing about, again, it's like we're wired to respond to personal stories, not to statistics. And the giving that you do in a very large church can feel more like you're having an impact on the margin of some statistic rather than affecting a story. Yeah.
Which kind of leads to another question. I mean, should we feel overwhelmed by the world poverty? There's so much poverty in the world around us, but sometimes there's like this huge disconnect. Should we be burdened as Christians for that world poverty?
So here's what I think. God never says, "Hey, until world poverty is eradicated, you haven't followed my will." But there's this passage in Matthew that kind of jumped out at me however many years ago it's just one of my favorite passages of Scripture, and it says, "Who then is the faithful and wise servant whom the master has entrusted to give food to his household at the proper time? It will be good for that servant whose master finds him doing so when he returns." And, my deal kind of is none of us are called to save the world. But God has given us the opportunity to give food, literally or otherwise, to some people in a corner of that world.
Yeah.
Who are they? How can, rather than being overwhelmed at the world's problems, who are the people I'm supposed to give food to?
Yeah. Yeah, and it seems like I believe that if all Christians, if the church truly challenged themselves to be more giving, I think everybody would also sense less pressure and maybe even conviction or condemnation of I'm not giving enough, because we would be like, oh my gosh, together we're all giving a portion and it's making a big difference. But I think what we could sense and not realize it is it's like so few people are giving. It seems so overwhelming. It's like, man, I wish I could help so many different things, which, we could if we were all, giving.
Sure.
How do you feel about New Testament versus Old Testament in giving? Like I've heard some people say, Malachi pretty much is what we need to be living by, as far as the tithe and bringing it into your, to the storehouse. And then people quote Paul by saying, give cheerfully and, pretty much stretch yourself with your giving. And so some teachers have taken that and said, hey, the tithe thing, that's out of here. Like you if you have more money, you should probably be giving more than 10%. And if that straps you too much, you probably shouldn't be doing that. There's not this certain standard that you need to be shooting for. Like, how do you feel?
I kind of fall into the camp of Paul had every opportunity to tell people to tithe, and he never did. And I don't think that was an accident.
Yeah.
And, so the question of how do you apply this Old Testament teaching? The law no longer applies. So what do we do with the principles of the law? And as, you kind of summarized, Paul's deal was, give, generously, cheerfully, sacrificially. And it is, the deal kind of is, and everybody needs to work that out for themselves.
Right.
Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. I think it says, I know it says somewhere, Hebrews 12 talks about, run with perseverance the race marked out for you. And your race is likely to be different than mine in some important respects. And the issue isn't to compare it, for you and I to compare each other to ourselves. It's to run the race that God has marked out for us.
Yeah. Yeah. My brother and I, we definitely grew up in cultures where they would certainly have instructed the single mother that literally didn't have enough money for 3 meals, and they would say, no, you still need to tithe because you'll see miracles then.
Yeah.
Hey, you would have no problem with saying, look, if you feel like you have such little money that you can't give, then ride this season out and, maybe get some advice and wisdom from some financial people that are smart to help you out and get yourself to a place where you can give again.
Well, I think 2 things. One of them is, and I don't know if either of you have read a book called Toxic Charity, and I'm drawing a blank on the author's name. He's been a long time involved in inner city ministry in Atlanta. And his kind of argument is that one of the things that we do, there are 2 ways to deal with poverty. One of them is the relief situation. A tsunami hits a country that thousands of people died. They desperately need to have, just fresh water airlifted in and food, or they're going to die. But that's not a normal setting. If you have someone who is struggling with chronic poverty, giving them food as if it was a emergency relief situation is not going to really help them. You're going to keep them dependent.
Right.
What you need to do is help them learn healthy habits. But at the same time, if your message to someone who's getting ready to starve is, well, here's a healthy habit you can adopt. Go do that, and God will bless you. I have a little trouble with that too.
Yeah. So Jesus said the poor will always be among us. Do you think that gives us reason to? All right, so the poor will always be amongst us, and we also know that money, it doesn't equal happiness. A lot of us, we fall into that. I've fallen into that. But with those 2 things in mind, I mean, could it be God's will for some people to be poor? Like, is that God's will?
I think that would be a bit of a stretch. And, again, what was the context? You got Judas, of all people, saying, hey, she shouldn't have poured that perfume on you. We could have given that money to the poor. And
right.
In one of the Gospels it said, and he said this because he used to help himself to what was in the money bag. And Jesus is saying, look, you'll always have opportunities to help the poor, but here's what she's doing now to honor me.
Right.
It wasn't let me make a profound theological statement about poverty in the world. But at the same time, I would just tell you, I think that if tomorrow, what we could do is we could reallocate all wealth so that as of 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, everybody had exactly the same amount of everything. What I would say is that before the week was over, you would have poor people and rich people again.
And then is that because of lack of maturity, lack of education, or
sometimes lack of just good, healthy skills?
Yeah.
And this is what, you were talking earlier about the, like the parents who just want to give their kids good things.
Yeah.
Okay. And boy, every parent has that desire. But what are you teaching your kids about money?
Right.
Are you teaching them that the most important thing in the world is how prestigious the expensive thing that you just got is?
Right.
Are you teaching them that having things is worth, living lives of heavy stress over? Why are so many people stressed about money?
Right.
I think part of it is because they grew up in homes where their parents were stressed about money,
right.
and they just think that's normal. They don't think there's anything unusual about that,
right.
or that there's even another way to live.
Right. Yeah, I had a trip. I was planning a trip to Washington, D.C. with a huge group of middle school kids, and they definitely came from a lower socioeconomic neighborhood. And basically, I met with the parents and I said, look, if I'm not asking y'all to pay the full price, but I'm definitely challenging everybody to come up with $75, $80. The full price was probably $300, $350. And some of them were just like, man, we really want our kids to be able to go. We can't afford that. And one of the families that was adamant against, hey, we just can't give anything towards this trip. And, I'm telling them 6-7 months before the trip. After a basketball game, we go to CC's Pizza, and their son literally, they gave him a $20 bill to have fun with the video games. And it was like, oh my gosh. Like, and they seriously weren't trying to dupe me. It wasn't like, oh, we do have the money, but we're not going to tell them. It was seriously a mismanagement. It was like, wait a second, we can't come up with 75, not even thinking that once in a while, here's a 20. I mean, it's just... Jared's still laughing.
No, I can't fathom like sinking $20 into video games
right.
if you don't have any money.
Right.
But it's interesting. I was reading a story about in fact, it might have been in that Toxic Charity book, and basically this, single mom came to this church desperately needing help, so they really helped her. They got her into an apartment, they gave her money for food, blah blah blah, and later, period of time later, she's still in need, and they found, I can't remember what it was, but it was the equivalent of that. She was giving her kids money for video games.
Yeah,
and they were just outraged. You're wasting the, and it was interesting. This guy went and talked to her, and it's like she was just brokenhearted, but she said, I just wanted my kids to have like a feeling like they were normal.
Right.
Well, you can understand that.
Yeah.
And again, that isn't just, I'm not trying to say, and that made it a good decision.
Right.
But, it's funny, I think, when you spend time with people who have lived in poverty, they just think completely differently than we do.
Yeah.
And it's hard for people who grew up in middle-class households to put themselves in their heads.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. Well, this has been good. I want to make sure you don't have anything extra on your sheets there that we missed out on. What would you say to, just church in general, if about money?
Well, for one thing, I think sometimes we can talk about money as if the object of the Christian life is to give away as much money as you can, and that is just that's not true. It's one among many things. We talk that way sometimes because our culture is obsessed with money. And I just think that's one of the things.
All right, hold on real quick. So you're saying that's not what Christianity is all about, but part of it is giving away as much money as you can?
What I would just say is the giving away as much money as you can. I don't know. Be generous. Be cheerful about it. Be sacrificial.
Gotcha.
As much money as you can. I just think people are called to different things.
Right. One thing I've heard our senior pastor or founding pastor say, which I think can easily be misconstrued, but I totally hear his heart in this, and it's actually refreshing. But there will be times, and the guy we're talking to, Jack, has a hand in helping our church make responsible decisions and all that stuff. But I've heard Pastor Greg say it's just money. Mm-hmm. And what he's trying to say is exactly what you said, is we put so much emphasis on money, and it's like, well, wait a second, what are we saying that money is? Like the absolute highest good? Money is everything? And that's so refreshing. You don't hear that often, because as important as money is, it is also it's a resource that we're just supposed to steward. It's not like the end all be all.
It's funny, in the thing where Jesus says you cannot serve both God and money, and the word he uses for money is sometimes translated mammon. It's just interesting the way he talks about it. He talks about it like it's an evil force.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's deliberate. There's something about stuff that really does capture most hearts, maybe all hearts, to some extent, unless you're purposeful about seeing it for what it is and doing things to counteract it. And I actually think that's one of the disciplines, one of the reasons that a giving discipline is important, is so that you're regularly counteracting that tendency in yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I need to let you get back to your private jet so you can...
Go watch my daughter ride her horse.